past few weeks, as schools across the UK have returned to teaching online, we've heard an absolute outcry about children's lack of access to digital devices and lack of connectivity. But the term digital divide is one that we've actually been using since the 1990s, and which we've, of course, been increasingly using since the pandemic closed schools across the world last year. And digital divide is generally understood to mean the economic, educational and social inequalities between those who have computers and online access and those who do not. The Children's Commissioner, the head of Oak Academy, MPs such as Siobhan McDonough have been at the forefront of campaigners calling on the government, mobile phone carriers and internet providers to come together to find solutions for all children to be able to access learning from home. And now the Secretary of State for Education has told head teachers that children without the ability to access learning online should attend school physically, not virtually. But according to Ofcom, 1.8 million children don't have access to a device, and 11% of the population don't have internet access. So that's a lot of children to bring back into classrooms during a health crisis. With the other new criteria, we're hearing of schools having 50% of children attending. There are different narratives at play between health and education. Even though the problem has been highlighted for years, and certainly since the beginning of the first lockdown 10 months ago, as evidenced by reports from the Carnegie Trust and from Parent Zone, which we'll talk a little bit more about later, too little has been done to ensure that children in disadvantaged families have access to devices and data. Since the beginning of 2021, we've seen our screens and airwaves full of reports of families struggling with limited data on the mum's phone and frustrated head teachers struggling to register students for the DfE's admirable but complicated scheme to increase data allowances. But as Lord Winston said recently, we've just not used the time well since the beginning of the pandemic, and we've lost all kinds of opportunities to really investigate what is needed to make online learning work better. And it's not just about devices and connectivity. I'd like to add support for digital literacy skills and knowledge to the list of factors which make up digital disadvantage. Back in 2015, the UK Parliament's Lords Select Committee published a report, Make or Break, highlighting the extent of digital exclusion across the country. They showed how people who are already disadvantaged because they're poor, they're old, they're unemployed, they live in temporary or social housing, are likely to be doubly disadvantaged because they have low digital skills. At the Connected Learning Centre, we've run programmes to support parents' digital skills for many years. Courses have included family learning and also a scheme using digital mentors in the community to support each other. The digital badges that we produced for the course included being a digital mentor to help someone else with their digital skills and becoming digitally empowered. And since the pandemic, we've been supporting school leaders and teachers in solutions for children learning from home. We've also been providing technical support for families receiving devices through the government's computer scheme for disadvantaged pupils. And what we've noticed is at the beginning of the pandemic, the focus was all about devices, and now concern has shifted to connectivity and data. But even when students have the kit and the broadband, for many families supporting their children, there are so many barriers in terms of the technical setup and the digital literacy aspects of online learning from home. In the London Borough where we're supporting families, only 15% of the Wi-Fi devices sent out by the government have even been turned on. And the mobile device management system on the devices has meant that families are unable to install new software or plugins, meaning that children are unable to access simple tools which they need for their schoolwork. No wonder that children from disadvantaged backgrounds have suffered the most with their education since the increase in periods of online learning since the pandemic began. As one head teacher said to me, having more laptops available to children and having access to internet data is crucial, but where families' lives are under stress and disruption, it's going to be hard for children to learn. I'm going to hand over to Caitlin now to tell us a bit more about why this matters so much.
Thank you, Sarah. Whilst, as Sarah has said, the digital divide is nothing new, the COVID-19 pandemic has thrust it into centre stage. As the Carnegie Trust Learning from Lockdown report put it, since the outbreak of COVID-19, the scale of digital exclusion in the UK has been exposed and exacerbated beyond all previous understanding. Nowhere has this been clearer than in the education sector. To put it simply, inequality of digital access leads to inequality of educational opportunity when that education is being conducted partly or fully online. Downloading and watching even pre-recorded video content is very high bandwidth. Live lessons and video conferencing require constant device access, and troubleshooting will often require adult support, where parents and carers are often juggling working from home with supporting their children in their learning. Even those with the skills and confidence to help may just not have the time. Many schools have prioritised doing an audit of what young people have access to. But as one secondary school computing teacher put it to me, what the pupils consider a suitable device may not necessarily be what the teachers consider a suitable device. Survey data from TeacherTapp found that just 1% of primary state schools provide devices that their children can take home, compared to 38% of private primary schools. Whilst at secondary level, 7% of secondary state schools provide take-home devices, with 20% of private secondary schools offering this. At the CLC, we've worked a lot with schools and teachers on the pedagogy of remote and blended learning. More on that later. Doing the work of planning activities, managing online environments, and forming communities is much easier with continuity of access to devices and applications. Teachers' ability to provide high-quality remote learning with the use of technology is not just contingent on the pupils having access to tech, but on teachers knowing that the pupils have that access. Planning and effective pedagogies are much easier when you know what you're working with. At the CLC, we've worked closely with our community of educators, all of whom have talked about a sense of belonging and engagement being key to the well-being of their pupils whilst not in school. Now, we might not be doing quite so many Zoom quizzes in lockdown part 3, but for many of us, the ability to socialise online has played a huge part in making being confined to barracks bearable. This means that meaningful digital access is crucial, not just for work, but also for play. A good example of this is the game Among Us. Hugely popular with young and perhaps not so young folks stuck at home, the fact that it is free and available on mobile devices has contributed to making it the most popular game of 2020. Many young people are reporting keeping in touch with friends through the game and feeling connected to those they might not be able to see in person. The lockdown popularity of the game speaks to two things: the demand for low-cost and flexibly available tech, and the social disadvantage of those without even this level of access. Eventually, though, the pandemic will be over. There is a lot of rhetoric around learning the lessons of lockdown, and when it comes to the digital divide, there are many takeaways moving forward. The first thing to note is, as Bob Harrison put it on Twitter, the online virtual blended learning genie is out of the bottle. I don't think it'll go back in. Many teachers that we speak to have realised the benefits of using technology in education. The ability to set homework and share marking rubric on Google Classroom. The ability to showcase work and do peer-to-peer feedback on Seesaw. The ability to run parent-teacher meetings remotely. All of these are uses of technology that began in lockdown that teachers have told us they want to keep. Almost universally, the workforce is skilled up. We'd be silly to throw that away in an increasingly digitised world, but it does mean that the solutions to the digital divide can't be short-term. We've already seen that when the urgency of the COVID crisis looks to be abating, so too has the governmental drive for supporting digital access. Before the last lockdown, for example, there were limits placed on access to the government device support scheme for schools with fewer children self-isolating. The Parent Zone Left Behind in Lockdown report from November 2020 recommends lifting limitations such as this to ensure better access for disadvantaged children and families. With the picture changing so rapidly, short-termist solutions cannot be the answer. Digital equality is for life, not just for the pandemic. The shift online has also thrown up something else, that not all young people know how to navigate the online world safely and securely. Young people may have grown up around technology, but this doesn't mean that they have the skills and understanding to use it safely. As Sarah mentioned at the beginning of this session, the digital divide is about skills as well as devices and connectivity. And these skills are going to be increasingly necessary as the world becomes more digitised. Young people need to know how to assess the reliability of an online source, to understand what behaviours are expected of them and others in an online space, and know when to put down the device and spend a bit of time offline too. During lockdown, research suggests that young people have been spending increasing amounts of time unsupervised online. And whilst this might revert back to a norm when the pandemic is over, it's also likely that this is another genie that never quite makes its way back into the bottle. Being able to determine fact from fake is crucial, not just in terms of children's learning, but in terms of their mental health and well-being. Throughout the pandemic, the proliferation of misinformation has been a minefield for adults and children alike. As they spend more time online, the likelihood that young people will be exposed to unreliable information increases. It is therefore vital that we work to equip them with the digital literacy and critical thinking and resilience skills they need to manage their path through the online world. In fact, the theme of this year's Safer Internet Day is An Internet We Trust, exploring reliability in an online world. And this isn't just important for young people. These skills are crucial for everyone, adults and children alike. So far here, we've identified the issues that make up and perpetuate the digital divide. I'm now going to hand you over to Rowan, who's going to talk a little bit about what we can do to help.
Well, one thing that we hope will help is the government's expansion of their laptop scheme this year, which should go at least some way towards meeting the needs in terms of access to devices. The BBC's educational broadcasts, which I should point out are yet to be broadcast at the time of recording this, also promise to help supplement the activities children are doing at home. I can imagine this being particularly helpful in the many households that are trying to share a smaller number of suitable devices between a larger number of family members. But it's also worth remembering that when it comes to completing schoolwork at home, laptops and desktops are not the only option. Many learning platforms and educational websites can be accessed through other devices that may already be in the home, such as tablets or mobile phones. Xboxes and PlayStations can even support the use of Google Classroom or Teams through a television. Of course, though these varied devices are in some ways helpful, they also present a challenge for teachers who, to make them a viable option for families, need to think very carefully about the lessons that they plan. Activities that involve typing, for example, may work well on laptops but are much less accessible for children using mobile devices. Live lessons can be difficult for families that have multiple children and working adults trying to access technology at the same time. Any activity that requires a specific piece of software to be installed may not be possible on devices that are externally managed, such as many of those provided by the government laptop scheme. No one solution will work for every school, family or child, and schools with higher levels of social deprivation in their communities are likely to have to be especially flexible in their approach. It's also important to remember that whatever the access limitations are, they are generally minimised when activities invite children to spend time away from the screen, perhaps prompting them or at least giving them the option to complete a piece of work on paper and possibly photographing it and sharing it through a given platform at a later point in time. Though the technology may be the means of communication between teacher and pupil, it doesn't always need to be the means through which the work itself is completed. And it isn't just the devices themselves that need to be considered. There's also the level of internet access a family has available, both in terms of data and bandwidth. Videos and live streaming can be a way for teachers to explain and model an activity, But for some families, and this might be an individual family or sometimes a whole community across a remote rural area, these modes of delivery are difficult, if not impossible, to access from home. Last year, Vodafone launched its Schools Connected programme to get free preloaded SIM cards to families that need them. And more recently, the government announced its mobile data scheme, which allows families to increase their data allowance on a number of participating mobile networks for educational purposes. These solutions may solve the problem for some, while in some areas, community groups like NYC Mesh in New York have taken it upon themselves to pull together local solutions, in this case using local businesses to create a network of hubs and nodes, bringing free internet access to families in New York. But even when connectivity is limited, there are approaches that teachers can take to planning and sharing that can also be helpful. This is something that we at the CLC have been exploring through our recent work supporting UNICEF in creating a programme of home learning activities for children in Jordan. Our support came in a number of different forms, and it required us to compile a detailed collection of approaches and ideas from across the globe into the issues and practicalities around emergency education provision. We were asked to suggest a method for delivering lessons to thousands of children across the country in a way that was clear, engaging, and accessible across a range of devices and levels of internet access. The option we proposed, which UNICEF ultimately used, was Padlet. If you've used Padlet before, you'll know it lets you create a kind of online notice board. Posts are added to a page, sometimes by the teacher, or sometimes more collaboratively by students, and depending on the privacy settings, everything gathered can be accessed through a single link or QR code, which can be accessed on virtually any internet-enabled device. The posts can include a range of formats: text, video, including screen sharing, voice recordings, PDFs, images, and links can all be shared in this way. For the teachers in Jordan, this means that visual and textual materials can be supplemented with voice recordings that explain them. Videos were also used for the project, but only sparingly, and they were always kept short and concise to minimise data usage. For this particular project, several boards were created by a central team each week, and they can be viewed but not edited by the children across the country. However, we've also spoken to teachers who have used Padlet, where they've enabled pupils to post responses to prompt activities on their board, creating a space for some teacher-pupil dialogue and class discussion. Like the teachers, pupils can make their posts in any one of a number of ways, depending on their technical setup and on how much time they have with the device, as well as their age and ability. It's also possible for teachers to moderate responses to check they're appropriate and don't raise any online safety concerns. This is just one example of a tool that offers helpful versatility to support a range of user needs, taking into account both bandwidth and what Daniel Stanford refers to as immediacy, how readily available the technology needs to be at a specific point in time in order for access to be possible. You'll notice he places live video and audio delivery in the red zone in this model, as it requires both high bandwidth and continuous use of a device at a specific time. Stanford suggests that educators should at least start thinking about the activities they plan in terms of how they can be achieved in the green zone, so asynchronously and with low bandwidth. While real-time delivery certainly has its benefits, Stanford suggests that before resorting to those approaches, it's wise to look to the other quadrants and consider whether the same goals can be achieved through a more accessible format. Of course, as Sarah and Caitlin have said, it isn't just about access to technology. It's also about having the skills to use it. There are many different approaches to this issue, and we've seen a huge range of amazing collaborative and creative responses from the teachers we work with, each of them working in their own unique setting with a unique community and a unique combination of factors to consider. We're grateful to work with such an inspiring group of professionals, and we'll be showcasing some of the great work they do in our upcoming projects this year, as Sarah will explain.
Thank you, Rowan. So one of the things that we are particularly excited about is a new programme of support which we are going to be launching this week, and that's the Blended programme. And this programme has been supported by IBM's trustee fund, and the site focuses on the pedagogy of blended and remote learning, and it provides advice from teachers and school leaders, as well as short courses and guides. And what we've really tried to do is to collate and curate all the great stuff that's out there, as well as producing our own materials, guides and videos. So please do have a look, and we're hoping it'll be very much a community of practice, so it will be a resource which will be growing over time. Please also have a look at our website and our blog that comes out each week, and on our website you can sign up for our newsletter, where we are always sharing advice and resources and opportunities, particularly around the area of the digital divide. And follow us on Twitter as well at LDNCLC. So. And if you would like immediate access to the blended site, there's a QR code link on that final slide. Please do get in touch with me, Rowan and Caitlin, and thank you very much. And I think we're going to be going over to some questions. Thanks everyone very much.